Hey guys, right here with another PvP guide, this time for the Unholy Death Knight for World of Warcraft Legion patch 7.2. Well, a couple of things have changed in the Unholy playstyle, especially in PvP. Right? With the inclusion of the new artifact and power traits, it changes our gameplay from disease spreader with your your ebon fever and those diseases to using more of a single target um, damage mechanic. Well, nothing else, let's get started with the talents. On the first row, instead of taking Eber Fever this time, we take Bursting Sores, which makes your Festering Wound deal 50% more damage when burst, and all enemies within 8 yards of a burst Festering Rune suffer 61k shadow damage. For her second tier, a level 57 tier, we have between Pestilent Puzzles and Blighted Rune Weapon. Right, I would personally choose Blighted Rune Weapon because your next 5 auto attacks infect your target with 2 Festering Wounds. This is very efficient because if you initiate the battle, you do not want to waste globals trying to apply Festering Wounds on the target. Right, you could just pop a Blighted Rune Weapon, and even your auto attacks will apply a quick amount of Festering Wound to the target, right? Thus saving more runes to use on Soul Reaper or Clawing Shadows or something more useful than applying a Festering Wound. And Pestilent Puzzles, for every 8 Festering Wounds you burst, you gain 1 rune. This is pretty interesting, but it would be more powerful if the requirement to gain 1 rune was around 4 or 5. It would be more acceptable. 8 Festering Wounds to burst rate again, only 1 rune is entirely expensive, so I wouldn't recommend that. For our level 58 tier, we have Clawing Shadows, which replaces your Skirt Strike. It deals 167 shadow damage and causes 1 Festering Wound to burst. This ability is a very important part of our rotation because it allows you to deal some sort of damage through bop. So if a target bops, if you have a paladin that bops a different target, and he happens to have Festering Wounds on them, the Clawing Shadows won't damage the bop, but it will still burst a Festering Wound from the target that is bopped. And most of your damage will come from bursting Festering Wounds. So very important talent to keep, and it's very important to keep in mind that it has a 30-yard range. That is ridiculous. That is the melee ability with the longest range. So it's very difficult for anyone to shut you down, for anyone to kite you, if you have Clawing Shadows. Right? For a level 60 tier, we have between Asphyxiate and Sludge Belcher. Now, Sludge Belcher is an ability that replaces your ghoul. It summons a stronger ghoul. It summons an abomination that not only looks different, it has different abilities, right? The reason I personally take this is because one of your abilities is a hook, which makes you hook your target to the ghoul, thus giving you 2 death grips. So you can bait, for example, a druid. You can hook him into a pet stun. He might trinket, and you can grip him again and start doing your damage. Right? Very powerful pet to have. Also, showing you a pet ability. Instead of having a claw attack, your abomination instead has a cleaver, which hacks the enemy, dealing 175% normal damage. Now, when you empower the pet, this cleaver transforms into a different ability, which causes your pet to release gas, dealing 80% of normal melee damage as shadow damage to all enemies. So 10% of the 100% of melee damage is going to be physical. The rest is going to be shadow damage. And if I'm not mistaken, Your mastery increases all shadow damage done by 42%. So your pet benefits from your mastery. Very important for damage. Now next here we have Corpse Shield. For the next 10 seconds, 90% of all damage you take is transferred to your Abomination. If your Abomination is slain while the spell is active, it cannot be resummoned. Important talent, helpful for survivability. Just keep the eye in the pet's HP so you don't let it die, because if your pet dies and you need the Corpse Shield, you will die because you will not have your pet to sacrifice for the shield. For our next tier, level 90 tier, we have Necrosis. This is a very important talent for the current meta. What Necrosis does is that dealing damage with Death Coil causes your next clawing shadows to deal 40% increased damage to the target. Now, this is an ability that is very, very, very powerful if used in conjunction with your artifact trait. Your artifact trait is Scourge of Worlds. What Scourge of World does is that it causes your Death Coil to have a chance to increase your Clawing Shadows damage against that target by 30% for 6 seconds. So that's 30% increased damage on your next Clawing Shadows by Scourge of Worlds. And you have a 40% increase on your next Claw Shadows by 40% by Necrosis, the talent. So that right there is almost 100% damage increase in your next Scourge Strike. So it's very important for your rotation, because ideally in arena or in any sort of PvP, your base rotation for main damage dealing is going to be get Fester Wounds on the target, get your diseases on the target, then use a Death Coil, use Scourge Strike. Use Death Coil, use Scourge Strike. And by Scourge Strike I mean Clawing Shadows. That's exactly what it should be. You never want to Clawing Shadow someone twice in a row. You want to alternate between Clawing Shadows and Death Coil. Always, because your Death Coils applies the debuff that will increase the damage of your Clawing Shadows. So it only makes sense. And for our last tier, it's Soul Reaper. We always want Soul Reaper because it hits people for 400k. And on top of that, it bursts 3 Fester Wounds. Each Fester Wound increases your haste by 7%. The Soul Reaper itself does not burst the Fester Wounds. You usually want to apply it before you use your artifact ability, Apocalypse. So it's very important that you take this talent. It will maximize your DPS. Right? Moving on to honor talents. Adaptation, Reinforced Armor. As base, if you get melee, you might be able to take Sparring. Anti-Magic Zone to provide a damage reduction every 2 minutes by 60% for your allies. Necrotic Aura. All enemies within 12 yards take 8% increased magical damage. This is very good if you're playing with spell cleaves like Shadow Cleave or Liberty Cleave. If you're playing with another melee that does not use magic damage, such as a warrior, right, or DH, you might be wanting to take Decomposing Aura, which causes your opponent to within 10 yards to slowly decay, losing 3% of their max health every 2 seconds. And it stacks up to 5 times, lasts for 6 seconds. So another powerful ability if used with a melee DPS that does not deal magic damage. But if you have an enhancement shaman, for example, Necrotic Aura will be beast during Bloodlust. For next year, of course, there's no other viable one. It has to be Crypt Fever. Whenever enemies are healed while affected by your Festering Wound, they take 58k shadow damage. Very important, because you should be prioritizing your Festering Wounds on all targets during the match, even the targets that you are not on. Reason is, every time these targets get healed, right, they will take some sort of damage, and you'll always have a debuff on them. You know, that's something else for the healer to worry about, especially during cleave moments. Okay? And for the next year, it's not worth taking Necrotic Strike anymore, unfortunately. So what we want to do is take Unholy Mutation. When your Virulent Plague is a spell or ends its duration, a slime spawns, dealing 2k plague damage, and slowing all enemies within 8 yards by 50% for 3 seconds. So keep in mind that during cleave moments, right, a lot of classes that dispel diseases, monks, paladins, priests, right, they are all bunched up together, or even a shaman when they go for link, and if somebody dispels, right, one disease from a target, then that slime will slow everybody down by 50% without you having to waste a global to reapply Chains of Ice that you could be using to deal damage, right? So you have these talents, you will be successful, alright? Moving on to artifact traits, alright? It's very important that I talk to you guys about some of these traits. The reason that our spec has changed so much from a more cleavy spec into a single target burst heavy spec is because of the empowered traits. Lash of Shadows increases the damage Fester runes deal by 24% when burst. This is very, very important because your Fester runes each deal around 140k damage per wound whenever they're burst. You have 8 wounds on a target. So when you pop Apocalypse, your Apocalypse hits people for around 500k. And it bursts 6 Fester wounds. These 6 Fester wounds each hit for over 100k. So you can hit people for over a million with a bunch of little hits. That is a lot of pressure. And this next this next trait is called Death Harbinger. So Apocalypse grants 3 runes upon use. So usually when you pop Apocalypse, you want to begin spamming your Cross Shadows Death Coil, Cross Shadows Death Coil. And this makes it easier to keep uptime because you get 3 runes after you use Apocalypse. Now, one of the important parts, especially for cleave comps that you run, is the golden trait, the golden empowered trait, Black Claws. While under the effects of Dark Transformation, your Abomination's Cleaver has a 50% chance to burst the Fester rune. And the Fester rune doesn't have to be burst by you to deal the same amount of damage, which means that even if your pet bursts a wound on a target, it will deal the same amount of damage it would do if you were bursting. And you have to keep in mind that when your pet is transformed, his cleaver transforms into the gas, the AoE gas. And if you're doing your job as a DK, everybody that is fighting you in the arena will have a Fester wound. And if a shaman stacks for link, or if your team is applying too much pressure and the other team has to group up to get topped, and your pet goes in there, it's going to be spamming that gas, and it's going to be cleaving everybody and popping everybody's Fester wounds. Very beautiful, very juicy talent to use, right? Take this trait. It will be the essence of your Unholy DK playstyle, right? This talent makes your pet viable again, right? It makes your Empowered Demon viable again, right? And these are some of the talent choices that I prefer on the DK, and I have had a lot of success with it. And if you follow the right rotations, right? If you prioritize the proper abilities at the right time, you will be successful. And the one thing you want to do is keep in mind that your Gargoyle does shadow damage with benefits from your mastery, right? All your diseases are shadow damage, so they all benefit from your mastery. Your Clawing Shadows, shadow damage, benefits from your mastery. Death and Decay, shadow damage, benefits from your mastery. But there's a catch to it. What Death and Decay does is it corrupts the ground, causing 215k shadow damage over 10 seconds to the targets within the area. While you remain in the area, your Clawing Shadows will hit all enemies near the target. I can't stress how crazy this ability is if you use it right, guys. If you throw a D&D on top of yourself and the target is 30 yards away, as long as you stand in the fucking Death and Decay and you climb shadow to the target, it will hit everybody around that target. That is crazy. If a mage blinks and his healer begins to drink next to him, you can throw the D&D on your feet, climb shadows a mage, and you will hit his healer that's drinking. Right? So Unholy DK has a lot of tools, right? A lot of things to make it useful. You just have to use it right and time your abilities right. Ideally, you want to use your major cooldowns at the start to force all the enemies' cooldowns. Since your Apocalypse is on a short cooldown, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to use it again. But ideally, what you want to start is, you want to begin the battle, apply your Outbreak to get a Virulent Plague on the target. Then, before you even make contact with the target physically, you want to proc your Blighted Rune Weapon. So your next attack will apply Fester Wounds. You want to enrage your pet, toss that Gargoyle on the target, and start stacking Necrotic Wounds on him. As soon as you get 8, put Soul Reaper on the target, pop Apocalypse, spam that Clone Shadows and Death Coil, and just alternate. And throughout the whole fight, you want to keep your diseases on the target, keep the targets low to Chains of Ice, keep Fester Wounds on everybody, which is most important, and alternate on your main target between Death Coil and Clone Shadows. Death Coil, Clone Shadows. That is the most important thing. I hope you enjoyed the guide, guys. If you have any questions, please leave it down in the description below. Like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. Now I will have some PvP combat so you can see how the spec will function. Thank you.
Drama Battalion.
Sometimes, man, sometimes it gets hard trying to reach my goal. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes I pretend